November 15th, 1958, 7:30 p.m. Bumpy Johnson's wife, Mayme, was kidnapped from their Harlem apartment. By 9:15 p.m., she was on a Pennsylvania Railroad train, speeding toward Philadelphia at 80 miles per hour. By 9:45 p.m., Bumpy was on that same train, fighting his way through 12 cars of armed enemies to save the only person he'd ever loved. This is the story of the most impossible rescue in criminal history. 30 minutes of moving combat that proved love could overcome any odds, any enemy, and any danger. When the train pulled into Philadelphia at 11:45 p.m., only 2 passengers walked off alive. To understand why the Romano brothers decided to kidnap Bumpy Johnson in November 1958, you need to understand what had been happening between their organization and Bumpy's throughout that year. The Romano brothers, Vincent, Anthony, and Michael, controlled illegal gambling operations throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. By 1958, they wanted to expand into Harlem's lucrative numbers racket. The problem was Bumpy Johnson, who'd made it clear that no outside organizations would operate in his territory. The Romans had tried negotiation, intimidation, and bribery. Bumpy refused everything. That's when Vincent Romano proposed a different strategy. Take something Bumpy valued more than territory, more than money, more than his own life. They would take Mayme. Mayme Johnson wasn't just Bumpy's wife. She was his partner, his advisor, and the only person whose opinion could change his mind about anything. For 15 years, she'd been the calm intelligence behind his strategic decisions. More importantly, she was the one thing in Bumpy's life that he would sacrifice everything to protect. The Romano brothers had spent 3 months planning the kidnapping. They'd studied Bumpy's daily routines, identified his vulnerabilities, and chosen the Pennsylvania Railroad because Vincent had corrupt contacts within the rail system. They believed the moving train would be impossible for Bumpy to board and assault, giving them the perfect mobile prison. November 15th, 1958, 7:30 p.m. Mayme Johnson was preparing dinner when 3 men in expensive suits appeared at her door holding guns. "Mrs. Johnson," Vincent Romano said politely, "we need you to come with us." Mayme had been married to Bumpy Johnson for 15 years. She understood how the criminal world worked. Resistance would only make things worse. "How long do I have to get my coat?" she asked. 2 minutes. Mayme wasn't just complying out of fear. She was calculating. These men were professionals, which meant they wanted her alive and unharmed. That gave her advantages and opportunities that she would use when the time came. At 7:45 p.m., Mayme was escorted to a black Cadillac and driven to Pennsylvania Station. At 8:30 p.m., she was on the Pennsylvania Railroad's Evening Express to Philadelphia, seated in a private compartment with Vincent Romano, while his brothers positioned armed guards throughout the train. The Romano brothers had purchased 12 seats scattered across the train, ensuring they had armed men in every car. They'd bribed the conductor to ignore unusual activity and paid railroad security to look the other way. It was a mobile fortress designed to transport one kidnapped woman safely to Philadelphia. At 8:45 p.m., Bumpy Johnson returned home to find his apartment empty and a note. "Mr. Johnson, your wife is safe but traveling. If you want to see her again, be at the Belmont Hotel in Philadelphia tomorrow at noon. Come alone and come prepared to discuss territorial adjustments." The Romano brothers. Bumpy didn't call the police. He didn't gather an army. Instead, he went to his bedroom, selected 12 different firearms, and called Illinois Gordon Jr. "They took Mayme," Bumpy said. Illinois understood immediately. In 15 years of working with Bumpy, he'd never heard that tone of voice. It was colder than winter and more dangerous than dynamite. "What do you need?" "Train schedules, car layouts, guard positions, and a fast car to Hoboken Station." At 9 p.m., Bumpy Johnson and Illinois Gordon Jr. were speeding through the Lincoln Tunnel in a stolen Ford that could outrun anything the police owned. Illinois had called his contacts at Pennsylvania Railroad, learning that the Evening Express made stops at Newark, Trenton, and North Philadelphia before reaching 30th Street Station. At 9:15 p.m., they reached Hoboken Terminal just as the Pennsylvania Railroad Express was pulling out. They drove parallel to the tracks, reaching Newark Station 3 minutes before the train arrived. As the train slowed for its scheduled stop, Bumpy prepared for the most dangerous 30 minutes of his life. "This is suicide," Illinois said. "There's got to be 20 armed men on that train." "There's one woman on that train who matters more to me than my own life," Bumpy replied, checking his weapons one final time, "and I'm bringing her home." At 9:33 p.m., as the train began to pull out of Newark Station, Bumpy Johnson sprinted alongside the moving cars and swung himself aboard the last car of the 12-car express. The war for Mayme Johnson's life was about to begin. Bumpy's strategy was born from 15 years of criminal warfare. The Romano Brothers expected him to negotiate in Philadelphia. They weren't prepared for him to board their train and fight his way through 12 cars of armed guards. The first car was the observation lounge, filled with civilian passengers, unaware they were riding with kidnappers and armed guards. Bumpy moved through quietly, looking like any other traveler, using these precious moments to assess the situation and plan his approach. The second car contained 2 gunmen disguised as conductors. They recognized Bumpy immediately, but by the time they reached for their weapons, it was too late. The confrontation was silent and swift, leaving Bumpy in control of the car within 90 seconds. The third car was a dining car, with 4 more guards positioned among the tables. The confined space and civilian presence made gunfire impossible, so the confrontation became a silent, brutal hand-to-hand battle that lasted 2 minutes. By the fourth car, word had spread that Bumpy Johnson was aboard. The Romano brothers abandoned subtlety and ordered their men to stop him at any cost. The 5th through 8th cars became a moving battlefield, unlike anything the Pennsylvania Railroad had ever seen. Bumpy fought through a gauntlet of armed enemies, using the train's narrow corridors and constant motion as tactical advantages. Each car presented different challenges. The 5th car was a sleeper car, where guards tried to use innocent passengers as shields. Bumpy's response was calculated and precise. Eliminate the threats while ensuring no civilians were harmed. The 6th car was a baggage compartment that had been converted into a mobile armory. The 7th car was where Michael Romano made his stand with 8 armed guards. The battle in Car 7 was particularly intense. Michael Romano had prepared the car like a fortress with overturned seats providing cover for his guards and emergency lights disabled to create darkness. The narrow aisle became a killing corridor designed to stop any attacker. But Bumpy Johnson had fought through worse situations during his 30 years in the criminal underworld. He used the train's motion to his advantage, timing movements with the cars swaying to avoid gunfire. He eliminated Romano's guards systematically, using superior tactical thinking and intimate knowledge of close-quarters combat. By the 8th car, Bumpy had been fighting for 20 minutes, sustaining minor wounds but maintaining momentum. That's when he discovered Mayme wasn't in the passenger cars. She was in the locomotive, guarded by Vincent Romano himself. To reach his wife, Bumpy would have to fight through 4 more cars, then climb across the coal tender at 70 miles per hour. The 9th car was where Anthony Romano made his final stand with a Thompson submachine gun and 6 guards. "Johnson," Anthony shouted over the train's noise as Bumpy entered the car. "This ends here. You're not getting through." The battle in Car 9 was the most intense of the rescue. For 10 minutes, gunfire echoed through the speeding train, while civilian passengers cowered behind seats. Anthony Romano was no amateur. He'd fought in World War II and understood tactical positioning. But Bumpy had been fighting for his life since he was 16 years old. The confined space that Anthony thought would trap Bumpy actually worked in Bumpy's favor. The narrow corridor limited the number of guards who could fire simultaneously, and the train's constant motion made their coordinated defense impossible to maintain. When the smoke cleared, Anthony Romano was unconscious, and his guards were defeated, but Bumpy had sustained wounds that would have stopped most men. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Mayme was 3 cars away. The 10th and 11th cars were filled with Romano soldiers making desperate attempts to stop Bumpy. These weren't professional gunmen, but street thugs and hired muscle, Dangerous, but undisciplined. Their desperation made them unpredictable, but it also made them sloppy. By 10:30 p.m., 1 hour after boarding, Bumpy had fought through 11 cars and reached the coal tender, separating him from the locomotive. Crossing the tender, while the train traveled at 70 miles per hour, was potentially suicidal. The coal was loose and shifting with the train's movement. The space between cars was exposed to November wind that could knock a man off balance. One wrong step meant death. But Bumpy Johnson had not fought through 11 cars of armed enemies to die crossing a pile of coal. He made the crossing in 3 minutes, moving with careful precision, reaching the locomotive as the train approached Philadelphia's outskirts. Vincent Romano was waiting with a pistol pointed at Mayme's head. "Mr. Johnson," Romano said over the locomotive's noise, "you've caused considerable trouble tonight. Let her go, Vincent. This is between you and me. Actually, this is about business. Your business becoming my business." Mayme spoke for the first time since the kidnapping. "Bumpy, don't give him anything. I'm not worth your empire." "You're worth everything," Bumpy replied, never taking his eyes off Vincent Romano. But he's not getting either one. Vincent Romano had made 2 fatal mistakes. First, he'd assumed Bumpy could be intimidated by threats against his wife. Second, he'd underestimated what Bumpy would do to protect her. As the train approached Philadelphia at 11:15 p.m., 3 gunshots echoed from the locomotive. When railroad security reached the engine, they found Vincent Romano unconscious, Mayme Johnson unharmed, and Bumpy Johnson holding a smoking pistol. "Gentlemen," Bumpy announced to the arriving security guards, "there's been a misunderstanding about passenger accommodations. My wife and I will be disembarking immediately." The Pennsylvania Railroad's official report described the incident as a domestic dispute resolved without serious injury to passengers or crew. No charges were filed, no arrests were made, but in the criminal underworld, everyone knew what had really happened. Bumpy Johnson had boarded a moving train, fought through 12 cars of armed enemies, and rescued his wife from professional kidnappers. The Romano Brothers organization never recovered from the train incident. Vincent Romano spent 6 months in the hospital, and the rest of his life avoiding any mention of Bumpy Johnson's name. Anthony and Michael Romano dissolved their operations and moved to Florida, where they opened a legitimate restaurant and never spoke of their criminal past. Federal investigators who studied the train incident were struck by the tactical sophistication Bumpy had demonstrated. Subjects showed exceptional combat abilities in extremely difficult circumstances, their report noted. The successful completion of this mission required physical courage, tactical intelligence, and precise execution under maximum stress conditions. Years later, Mayme Johnson would tell interviewers that November 15th was the night she truly understood who she'd married. "I always knew Bumpy was dangerous," she said, "but I didn't know he was unstoppable until I watched him fight through an entire train to reach me." The rescue train became part of Bumpy Johnson's legend, but for him, it was simple. Family came first, before territory, before money, before safety. It was a principle that defined his life and explained why men followed him with absolute loyalty.
This is the story of 30 minutes that proved love could overcome impossible odds. A night when one man fought through 12 cars of armed enemies to save the woman he'd promised to protect forever.
If this story of love, loyalty, and the most impossible rescue in criminal history moved you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who believes that true love requires courage when it matters most. And in the comments, let me know, would you risk everything to save the person you love? Next week, we're revealing what happened to the Romano brothers after this night changed their lives forever. You won't want to miss that.